Hello, everyone, once again. For those of you who just joined, welcome to our show. What we'll be discussing today is how to transition into UX in 2024 and what has changed, if anything. And so you can land your first job. We have invited an awesome guest speaker who is a seasoned UX professional and has lots of experience in the field and worked at quite a few different companies like Yahoo, The Economist, American Eagle. I'll let Danny introduce himself in a few minutes. He's also the founder of UX Support Group, which I know many of you guys are members of, which is in one of those awesome and biggest meetup communities about UX. If you're not a member, highly encourage you to join that community. It's very active, one of the most active ones. All right, so we'll introduce our speaker in just a sec. For those of you joining us for the first time, my name is Michael, and I'm the founder of a company called BeginX. We help people who know UX basics and want to transition into UX. Our program is a part-time UX career accelerator with real mission-driven client projects that provides a guaranteed way to become highly marketable and land a UX role. Unlike most traditional bootcamps or career programs, we allow our participants to build real experience, strong real client portfolio, case studies, crucial software UX skills like team collaboration, client and stakeholder management and presentation, as well as mastering the UX job search and interview necessary to actually land a UX role. So, and all in a collaborative and fun environment, right, under the guidance of industry practitioner mentors from top companies. And I don't mean this to brag or anything like that, but just to give you a bit of a background for credibility purposes. The company is headquartered in New York City, and we have run many virtual cohorts, so helped probably around 160 people or so get hired by now into UX roles. We'll tell you a bit more about our virtual program and also make a special announcement closer to the end of the event. Of course, that part is completely optional for you. All right. Let's switch up to the next slide here. Amazing. So here are some companies that the grads are hired by. So we basically have seen lots of people go through this entire UX career transition. So let's jump to the fun part and introduce our awesome guest speaker and then proceed to the actual interview. So Danny, it's so great to have you here. Thanks again for joining us. Really excited to have the discussion with you because I know how much experience you have in this field. I know how long you've done this for, how many people you spoke with. You're basically an expert at this by now. And so I think you can, and we've done a couple of events with you at least before and always receive this like amazing feedback and, you know, about the insights you share, etc. So yeah, again, thanks for joining us. Really great to have you here. So would you like to briefly introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So I came from graphic design background. Graphic design became web design, and then kind of like accidentally, in a way, got into this UX field without realizing it was UX. I've been doing this since before it was called UX, before UX existed. So I started with working for a marketing agency, and then from there I moved to Yahoo Finance as the first UX job. Back then it was called UED. So it's along the way we lost the E in the experience, but back then it was UED, user experience designer, and that's where I learned by doing the different the different parts of UX process, and then from there went to Economist, worked for their website, and then moved to the mobile team, leading there. And as I did that, also I worked at General Assembly. So I taught some UX in the bootcamp there, both in the transition side of things, people transitioning to UX, and also from the enterprise, and basically allowing companies like Kimberly-Clark, like PricewaterhouseCoopers, these companies to upscale their UX skills. And from there, work with startups, and that's where I met Michael. I remember that when Michael was still like trying to put this together, we had a lot of conversation, and it was really cool how he positioned this as something that's not competing with the boot camps that are already meeting the needs, but he's filling the gap, the needs that's still very big. And I'm very passionate about this area of helping people to transition and particularly get the opportunities to be seen by different employers. So that's why I started UX support group. And after doing a lot of this startup stuff, I went back to agency, and now I'm at AmericanEagle.com as the head of UX. So that's all I got for the introduction, Michael. Back to you.
All right, it's awesome. Yeah, that's great. So let's jump into the discussion, and also for our awesome audience. So just a quick reminder, if you have a question, please use the Q&A tab. Again, this way you can also upload others' questions. Please do so. Please review everyone's questions. And this way we make sure we address the most popular ones that many people are interested in. And yeah, we'll take it from there. All right. And also just a quick reminder, we'll make a special announcement about the program we're running closer to the end of the event. And we'll also share the career transition roadmap summary handout. So stick around if you would like to get that. All right. So Danny, let's kind of first take a quick step back and just start with the bigger picture, or our end in mind, right, so to speak. To make your job search effective, right, it makes sense to first find out what employers are really looking for in UX candidates, and then make yourself an attractive candidate, right, which actually very few people do. Like, very few people use that exact approach. In your opinion, what do you think are the top 3 to 5 most important things that define that attractive fit? And then we'll jump into the details of kind of all these different phases.
Okay, so I like this mindset of like starting with the end in mind. And in fact, this is one of the things that I tell my team all the time because as you start doing this different UX project in the real world, it's not a clean process. You start with like different places and it's very ambiguous. So knowing the end is always a good way to frame where you're going. So if you don't know where you want to go, the destination, what that looks like, then you're not gonna get there, right? So that's what I love about this conversation, is that we're focusing on what does the goal look like. The end goal looks like you're getting hired, right? So then I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of somebody who's hired and reviewed a lot of portfolios and hired a lot of UX designers. A lot of them most of them actually came from like boot camps. So I know that the boot campers, and I also like couple self-taught. So I know that you can do this without like going through like 4-year college or like master's, if that's the path you want. But anyways, to answer the question about what makes the candidate attractive, competitive, marketable, whatever the word you want to call it, the person needs to be extraordinary, right? What does that mean? So extraordinary means that they need to be ordinary first, meeting all requirements, and then they have extra. A typical question that I get asked is like, how many case studies do I need to have in a portfolio? I'm sure, Michael, you get that question quite a bit too, right? That's the typical question we get asked. Yep, every single time we get that question. And that question a lot of time means that people are asking, what's the minimum number of portfolio? There's like a good thing about it, but there's also a bad thing about that question. The good thing is that this person potentially is eager to start applying for jobs. So they want to know when I can start applying for jobs. That's a good mentality to have, because you need to actually test your product, right? So you can know what's working and how to iterate on it. But the bad part about that question is that it's the minimum mentality. It's not that extraordinary. So if I'm reviewing, so we're going to UX this, right? So I'm the persona hiring manager. This is what my experience is like. For one, particularly for the entry level or junior level designer, every single job opening, I will get like tons, maybe more than 100 applicants, right? So how much time do I spend for each of them? Probably 30 seconds or less, honestly. And it's just quickly scanning. And even like in the first 10 seconds, if the homepage of the portfolio doesn't grab my attention, next, right? So it needs to be more, it needs to have more to pull me in. So that's what I mean by extraordinary. So back to the number of case studies. If it was the minimum, the ordinary, I see 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, and then yours got 4, then you're extraordinary. There's something different. So there are different ways to make your portfolio, your case study, your resume extraordinary. One of them is that just like show something that's more than what other people have typically. So you need to do comparative analysis and figure out what that is. So that's something that attract my attention as the reviewer. Another one, if this person already owns it. So the one thing that is not going to work, the negative is that if, let's say, since you're transitioning, I'm a musician transitioning to UX, because that's for sure I'm not going to talk to this person, because I'm not trying to hire a musician. So it's almost like, oh yeah, I need an electrician and my super happens to do electric wiring. Am I gonna hire my super? Probably not, right? So that's an example. So that's another thing. Own it. You're already a researcher, you're already a designer, because if you already have the training, you know how to provide the value, even if you've never worked in the field professionally before, you already know how to provide the value, and that's what you're positioning yourself. Speaking of that, positioning is super important. So again, being extraordinary, make sure that you position yourself, you own the space where it's not just calling yourself a UX designer or UX researcher, but UX designer of what? So that people can actually see your positioning. If you want to be the designer or the professional for the answer for everyone, you're targeting no one, right? So let's say UX designer in fashion or UX designer with AI experience, whatever the case might be, try to own a space and have a niche. So I think we can continue from here, Michael. I could go on and on forever.
It's like it's a huge question. It's basically like answer the whole topic, right? So it's yeah, but I did want to just kind of take a step back and just do it high level. Again, we'll dive into details of like all these different areas and competencies and phases. So let's talk briefly about hard skills or technical skills, right? So in your opinion, what are the most important hard or technical UX skills that employers look for?
I think I'm gonna assume that we're talking about a product design job here, which is like looking for somebody who can do the end-to-end from research to actually prototyping and testing, right? In which case, then from my end, again, from the hiring manager perspective, I need to see these skills demonstrated. So what the skills are from the beginning, from the UX process, right? From the research side, I need to see how you can do research, hypothesis, defining problem, survey, user interview, those things. I need to see that demonstrated. So I need to see something in your portfolio that does that. And then the next hard skill would be, of course, the whole like creating diagram, like user flow diagram, creating sitemap, those things, information architecture, and then wireframing, lo-fi, hi-fi. So I need to see also the lo-fi. This is something that sometimes I see this people are not showing the lo-fi, like the sketches, low fidelity. That's something that I actually look for. A lot of people look for, because that's the thinking is shown there, not just the high fidelity. And then up to high fidelity, visual design mockup, and then like you doing usability testing and some prototyping. Those are the hard skills that are the bare minimum. And those are actually pretty straightforward, because they're mostly just common sense with some best practices.
Okay, awesome. All right, and I see some questions already getting into the Q&A tab, which is awesome. Again, as we discuss this, please use the Q&A tab. No question is dumb or stupid. Anything you guys want to know about, focused on UX career transition, not other stuff. So please put your questions, review others as well. Would love to take as many of them as possible. All right. Daniel, let's talk briefly about soft skills, right? So what are the top soft skills that, in your opinion, hiring managers look for in more junior candidates specifically, maybe, and how one can build those?
So I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of not just junior, but in general for UX, right? And then I'm gonna zoom into the junior role. So in general, as a UX designer, our roles is not just to create deliverables. Our role is not to create wireframe. Our role is actually to facilitate the design process. So, for example, right, at the beginning of the project, normally it starts with somebody, a business, has a problem. They want to increase conversion, let's say, of their e-commerce site. They want to make more money. So typically, the beginning of this whole thing, the business just want to either make more money or don't lose money or save costs, right? From there, then we need to figure out how does the user actually use the website so that we can deliver that business goal. And to understand that, we need to do the user research, right? So, and then we need to define the persona. So things becoming more and more concrete from there. Now, for example, we get to the persona, we create a persona, right? The persona itself is important, but what's more important than the persona is actually the decision that's made after you have the persona. So we have the alignment, so we can define what the problem is. And then after the problem, we start creating user flow diagram, which is showing like, these are the steps how the user would complete the checkout process or use this find a product and check and finish the checkout process, right? And that is, again, at the end of the day, the diagram will not be used by the user or by anyone after we agree on something. Oh, this is correct. And then we create wireframe. So along the way, the soft skill is really to storytelling is the big one. Storytelling is the big one, to like tell the story, to get people to move people, in this case, your teammates, like, because we always work with cross-functional team, which Michael actually mentioned a little bit with BeginX, right? You guys always have cross-functional team involved with a client because you need to sell the idea. So one of the biggest skills for UX actually is negotiation. One of the main books that I like to recommend is Never Split the Difference. So if you guys are curious about this, that's one of the most important skill, negotiating, because you always try to move this forward, advocate for the user, but at the same time, understanding where the people come from. But people in this case could be developers, could be marketers, could be product managers. So that's I think the soft skill in this case, storytelling, negotiation, those are like the biggest ones.
Okay, awesome. And by the way, Mika, if you could put that book in the chat, we'd really appreciate it. Whenever you have a chance, don't have to put the link, just the name. Never Split the Difference. Do you remember the author, Danny?
Yeah, Chris Voss. So he was an FBI agent, and he was involved in hostage negotiation. So he's taking the stuff from hostage negotiation and applying it to like everyday life business. It's really powerful stuff.
Okay. All right. All right. So Alice is also asking here in Q&A about the graphic design skills. How important are those skills when you're transitioning into this field?
I think right now it is still quite important because we're still relying on GUI, GUI as in graphical user interface, right? With the icons, with the visual. But what's interesting with in the time that we live in, text interface is gaining way more prominence with like all these prompts and AI. That said, going back to the question about how do we make ourselves marketable to get hired, to get noticed first before we can get hired, right? The first thing with portfolio, and this relates to portfolio because graphic design relates to portfolio the most, case study. Just like when you use dating apps like Tinder, right? Most people don't swipe the personality, they swipe the face, right? Because it's split second. So the same thing, if your website doesn't look, your portfolio doesn't look credible, and it doesn't look beautiful, the hiring manager may not spend more time. That said, there are many ways to actually do this in a way that doesn't require you to go back to school to learn graphic design, right? There are a bunch of templates. As long as it looks credible enough, then it's enough. And then also on the day-to-day, the graphic design skills would be useful in applying the UI elements to create high fidelity mockups. So you don't need to create those things normally with a lot of big companies. They have the design system already, but you need to know how to put them together using the different graphic design principles to make it look good, right? Look credible, look professional.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's an interesting time right now, right? It's just a quick side question. What do you think is mostly changing at the moment, Danny?
It's very interesting how I think I'm probably on the minority here, how I believe that all this AI is actually is highlighting the humanness more as opposed to less. Because if you don't have to spend time creating the nuts and bolts of things, then the brain capacity is freed up to do more creative stuff. What if I do this? What if I do that? More trying different things. Now with that, there is a big shift in the way we interface with technology. So user interface is simply the way the user interface or interact with the machine, and the machine interact with the user, with the human, right? That's what user interface is, the thing that allows us to do that. Right now it's graphical, as I mentioned earlier, which is buttons, logos, images, but more and more with the AI is becoming voice and becoming text, words. So that's gonna be really interesting as we change the way we interact with the technology.
Yeah, that's cool. I remember you actually even hearing that this is basically going to be evolving like as another type of interface, right? This more of like AI-oriented interface. I think Nielsen was writing about it in his blog in terms of how this is like basically another revolution, and that there'll need to be a lot of UX work done to actually make this new interface more user-friendly.
Yeah. So one thing to add to this is I'm going to share a little story of like this. This is something that I like to share when people ask me like, is AI gonna take over my job? Am I doomed? So the story goes like this. So Jeff Bezos was interviewed, this is many years ago, when Amazon started to get big, and he was interviewed and asked if to talk about what would change in e-commerce, right? And he said, that's an interesting question, but at Amazon, we don't think about what's changing. We actually focus on what doesn't change, things that don't change. And for Amazon, there are three things that don't change, which is the customer always want things more. They want things faster, cheaper, and more options. That's it. And as you can see over the years, that's what they do more and more. I just saw in the news about like now they can sort the product in the delivery van to make it even faster, right? So faster, more option, where they included like other option, including more external sellers, more products. So why am I talking about this? So at the end of the day, as long as we're still here, and as long as Terminator is not here yet, human needs are the same. Human needs always stay the same. We just change the way we actually satisfy the needs. We meet the needs. The solution changes. That's what is called technology. But the human needs stay the same. And the most important thing is actually, before we can come up with a solution, we need to understand the problem, and that's where we come in. And along the way, we need to, again, facilitating the movement is the humans again.
Awesome. Yeah, that's I know we're kind of slightly went on a tangent a little bit, right? But this is a crucial thing, right? That is happening right now, how things are evolving. And yeah, we'll actually thinking about doing a whole event just focused on that. We did a couple of events similar in the past, and probably do more as basically because AI is like this huge crucial trend right now. All right, so another very popular and important question for you, Danny. How do I break into UX without professional design experience that everyone wants?
I think that's very similar to the question about the graphic design. UX design, although again, we're using a lot of the GUI skills, the bigger picture is really solving the human problem, right? So understanding human needs, solving human problem. And this is something that I noticed that some of the UX designers who are really good at what they do actually came from different backgrounds. They're not like, I have one designer who's like, she's really good. She came from PR background. And she is so good at what she does because she knows how to communicate things very effectively and she understands the psychology very well. Now, with that, you still need to compete on that level. Again, going back to extraordinary. So you need to at least be ordinary first, meet the requirements, and then have the extra. The extra, you should bring whatever you have from your past experience dealing with humans, meeting human needs, right? And the big thing with this is like there is this thing called the T-shaped generalist. That's like the way we are looking for the skill set builder. So imagine a T. So there's like different blocks there, and then there's one that's deep. So that represent the skill level. So let's say you have the skill for research and a skill for diagramming, wireframing, all this, right? And then you need to have all of these, but then one of them should be deeper, very deep. For example, in this case, maybe research, if you don't have the visual design background, or somebody who's coming from graphic design background, maybe the visual design is the deeper one. So that way you can position yourself as your designer that's coming from this background, and that's your competitive edge.
Okay. So then a quick follow-up on that, right? Also related to this work experience. I know like work experience is basically our kind of, bread and butter, basically, right? What we really help people gain in the program, right? Besides all the other stuff. And that's why I kind of love this area overall. But obviously it's like not the only way to do it, right? While transitioning. So can you think of like, how can one build work experience when most employers are already looking for candidates with 1 or 2 years of that experience, even for entry-level jobs?
Well, the biggest way is to just not ask for permission, just go for it, meaning that after you finish your education, even before you finish your education, if you could already start doing projects, even for friends, families, and there's of course Catch a Fire, which is a website where you can be paired up with like nonprofit, and then also like Begin X is a great one. Also, just don't wait for the opportunity to be given to you, to come to you, right? Continue practicing your craft even after you finish the product, the education, and even before you get hired. So continue, you can call yourself freelancer, and as long as you continue practicing it, that's actually not a lie, right? Just because you don't get paid full-time, or even if you don't get paid at all, you're not going to lower the quality of work that you produce. So in that case, then you can still claim that as like, oh, that's relevant experience. So that's the biggest thing. And then the other thing is just related to just get as much experience as possible, so that even if you don't have that number of years, you can showcase it differently. Like that's another, going back to the question, the conversation earlier about number of case studies. If you're showing, let's say 5, 6 case studies, and you write on Medium about different projects, you write on LinkedIn, you're making noise and you're showing these different things, it sends a signals that you're gaining experience, and you actually can signal that I have some experience. That's a hack that's been working very well.
Yeah. In addition to that, you can also, like Danny said, right, basically volunteer for different organizations or companies or startups, right? And you don't have to basically transition in a traditional way, right? First you do the learning and then you do the experience, right? You can ideally, like our philosophy basically on that is, it's good to learn through like the first project is hypothetical, right? So that's good, right? But then after that, just start learning through real stuff, right? So either, and you could get our help, of course, right? But you could also do something like that on your own as well, and basically just start volunteering and getting companies and working on stuff, right? And this way you will learn and iterate and basically polish and improve and practice and grow in all of your skills and just become much more marketable, much more hireable versus just doing the hypothetical stuff.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that, imagine that you're already in the interview, right? One of the things that interviewers like to ask is, okay, so talk about a time when you had problems with, let's say, a developer, with client. So this is something that only real world project would give you, right? And then actually, if you think about it, job interviews, a lot of times is really just exchanging stories. So you need to collect these stories of like your battles, essentially, right? You're trying to push this through. They don't have the budget, but you did this. Da 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 da. Compare that to somebody who just had all student-based work. Even if like there's like 3 of them in student-based work, it's not as appealing as somebody's like, okay, I volunteer for this. It's not a full design process. And this is the other thing. When you're doing this real world project, it's most likely won't be the full design process, and that's okay. You can put in the portfolio also.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense as well. What do you think are the top 3 things that make a UX portfolio effective, in your opinion?
So I'm going to answer that by just recalling what I look for as a hiring manager, right? So first, how I evaluate that is am I at the right place? Meaning that does the person even claim that they are, a UX designer, UX architect, right? Am I at the right place? And second, does it look credible? Do they care enough about the experience of their own site, their own home? And then from there, I want to see the different deliverables, artifacts on the case study to give me the signal to demonstrate that they could do the hard skills. The hard skills, I normally have a list. Everybody has this checklist in their minds of what they're looking for. For example, I want to look for lo-fi wireframe, hi-fi wireframe, prototype, all these things, research, like the keywords, right? So I look for these things, and the best way to show these things is really to use headings and use like tons of like some images that with clear caption, so it's clear what they are. So that's normally how I figure out, okay, what's appealing, what is a good portfolio. So if they got that, then normally they got the call.
Okay, so that makes sense. I see some questions popping up in the chat in Q&A a bit more, so that's awesome. So keep those coming. Think about like what's your most pressing question? Like what's your biggest challenge while making this transition? If you already started getting into UX and learning, right? What's your biggest question? If you're already in the process, right? Maybe you already got some skills and you're stuck with your portfolio. So just feel free to put all those questions in the chat. We again want to make this event as valuable as possible. All right. So Denny, coming back to portfolio, right? Maybe let's touch on resume as well a little bit. What do you think are the biggest mistakes that candidates make in their portfolios and maybe in resumes as well?
I think the biggest mistake, I think the two applies, but I'll start with the resume, is to make it too visual. Typically this is the mistake that people from graphic design background make. The resume is too visual, but it's not really communicating much, and then it doesn't go through the reader, the machine that actually tried to find the keywords. So that's the biggest mistake for resume. So it's just, resume is basically a place where you showcase what you've done, showcase the skills. So make sure that it's easy to scan, but at the same time, it's it should be giving signals. You can do wireframing, you can do user research, all these things, use the keywords. The same thing with the portfolio. Some of them are very polished, but too polished that it doesn't talk about the process. for UX portfolio, we're looking for process. I'm going to answer actually one of the questions there, the difference between portfolio and case study. Portfolio is basically showing what you can do. And the portfolio, normally a website, consists of case studies. Case studies meaning that these are the different projects I've done, and you're explaining how you're doing it, how you did that, the process of starting with identifying the problem, the challenges, until your solutions, and connecting the dots between the different points. One of the big problem is if you show just different deliverables, but you don't know how they're connected. And this will show in the interviews, and this is like typically an automatic no. Did that answer your question, Michael?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's you brought up a few good points. All right, so that's cool. And by the way, in the chat, I still see that it looks like Mika is still like working through my account somehow. So that's why you'll see, you guys will see my name. But it's Mika writing or Mika clarifying something. So just FYI, that's not my picture. That's our amazing assistant. And I also see Philip. You put a question in the chat. If you don't mind, can you please put that in Q&A? This way others can also see it and upload it, etc. So if you could just put that in the Q&A section as well. So this way we all have everything in one place, and then we'll basically prioritize and take all those questions. All right, and here's another thing I wanted to ask you, Danny. When a hiring manager, and maybe you already touched a little bit on this, but let's see like what else you'd like to add. When a hiring manager evaluates portfolios, do they give equal weight to all the case studies?
I think that's typically dependent upon the kind of business they're in, right? For example, if let's say you're a hiring manager for a fashion tech company, then of course the case studies with the fashion related stuff would have more weight. And the other thing that would carry more weight would be the gimmicky stuff. What do I mean by that? For example, instead of just another website, another app, this is something in the title says something with AI, because it's very trending right now. Then that would carry more weight. That would get people to be curious about it. So I think those are the things that would attract my attention and pull me in. And the other thing would be how in-depth it is. So first, make sure that there's something that's interesting, that's different, that's extraordinary. And then once I'm in, I look for the depth depending on what I'm looking for, right? For example, if I'm looking for somebody who's heavier on the research, I want to see more of that.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I see like some additional questions popping up here in the Q&A. Awesome, that's what we love. So keep those questions coming. So I see a question here related to what I just asked. All right, so Alina is asking, Danny, what kind of questions do you usually ask candidates during the UX interview?
This is
It's a secret, right?
This is a longer conversation that maybe require beer. Since Alina, you're in New York City, we have the happy hour every Thursday, a plug. Anyways, but I'll answer that really quick. The kind of questions I usually ask candidates would be asking them about their process, trying to poke holes to see how well they understand their process. For example, like I see there's one where let's say user about flow diagram. I saw this before. They create user flow diagram and then they go to persona in their case study. So I'm like, wait, so why this after this? What's the decision there? How did this help you with this? Right? And then they're like, that's what my teacher told me. Right? Wrong story, right? I mean, that's like the wrong answer. So things like that, I would look for. I'm just basically asking for clarification to understand their thinking. And another thing is that I would ask them. So typically the way that goes is that I would ask the candidate to pick one case study, the one that they feel is the strongest, and walk me through that. So I'll just listen, and then I ask clarifying questions and then probe. And then after, if everything was good, then I would ask them questions to see how they think. For example, I would be like, okay, so in this case, this is perfect world scenario where you have all the time in the world, the budget, whatever, is like, it's not a problem. What if the client said that they didn't have the budget for user research, right? How would you go about this? Or let's say they didn't believe in the result. They think that the result was not accurate. What would you do? So basically, I'm trying, in this case, I knew that most likely they don't know how they don't have the experience level to answer this based on their experience, but I want to see how they handle it, the way they think about it. Is it going in the right direction?
Okay, okay. So yeah, that makes sense. Here's, yeah, another, I'm gonna ask another question, then I want to take a couple of questions from Q&A as well. I know, because you usually get lots of questions about case studies, about portfolio, right? Because this is like basically the most important asset, usually job search asset that UX folks have. So can you share maybe a little bit more insights in terms of what types of projects are most effective in one's portfolio? Plus, how can you tell hypothetical projects apart from real ones?
Typically, when I can tell when it's hypothetical, when it's a very junior person and then they use really big brands. For example, there was this one candidate who had Uber and they claimed that they did user research for Uber, right? So then I was like, wow, that's impressive. How did you land that? And then she fessed up. She's like, oh, actually, there's a school project, right? And then I was like, okay, already talking to her. So I gave her the opportunity. Okay, what did you do for this? She put user researcher, right? Apparently, there was a group project. And then I dig deeper. And then she fessed up that she just basically took notes. She didn't even do the research. As in, like, she was part of the team, but her teammates did the actual interviewing, creating the thing, and she was just taking notes. So in that case, I felt like that was misrepresenting what she did. So that's definitely something that definitely need to avoid, right? That's how you know when it's hypothetical versus real project. What was the other question, Michael? That was like two parts of the question: hypothetical versus
Yeah,
real
basically,
client. What was the other one?
what types of projects are most effective? Like,
Oh,
if you can, yeah, pinpoint maybe what is more effective, less effective, and why.
so I think I'm probably the best way to answer this is using different categories. Right, one is hypothetical student work or passion work, passion project, whatever you want to call that, versus real client. Obviously, real client is more. Another one is that's more effective. It can show results, but this is in most cases for people who are starting out. This is really hard to get to quantify the results. But if you can do that, that's very powerful, especially if you come from, let's say, business or product management background, to show that it's really powerful. Another thing would be something that's more engaging, interactive. One of the tips that I like to give people is that instead of just having a link to your Figma for portfolio, record a video of the walkthrough with narration. So that it's very interactive and people know, like, oh, there's the context, they just click on it and it can get the sense of who you are. So more engaging is definitely better. And I think, again, keep going back to like quantity, like signals that you got, you're passionate about, you've done more.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Danny. Awesome. All right, so I see that you also briefly touched on that before, that Kavitha asked a question. By the way, if I mispronounce anyone's name, obviously it's not intentional. Feel free to try to correct that in the chat, maybe, if that's, there's no voice, but anyway, so Kavitha asked a question about the difference between portfolio and a case study, right? So anything you want to add to that? I know you already mentioned, you already answered that briefly, but anything else you want to add to that, Danny?
Yeah, typically people just use that interchangeably because portfolio consists of case studies for UX.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically like sometimes when they refer to like portfolio is like the whole site, basically, right? Your portfolio site. And then the most important stuff on that site are the case studies, right? But you also have like about page, you also have, you know, like your overall information architecture and kind of how you position it. Yeah, but that's in a nutshell. Um, all right. I also wanted to just clarify this in terms of the real client case studies, right? Anything else you want to add to that, Danny, in terms of why do you think it is important to have those real client case studies in your portfolio, not just hypothetical student projects, and any additional differences that you, in addition to what you already mentioned?
I think I'm sure that intuitively most of us have experienced something like that and realized that okay, you would pick somebody with more experience, that's what it is, versus somebody who's green, right, out of school. And it's because at the end of the day, the reason why experience matters is because like when, let's say I hire somebody, I want to minimize the training that I have to give this person, like the hand holding. Because the reason why I'm hiring somebody is because I'm already overworked. I don't have time to actually uh, train more. I will train, of course, but I want to minimize that. That's why the more experience that person have, the better, right? In terms of like navigating different use cases in the workplace. So for example, if they're blocked by a developer and they've done that before, they work as developers before, then now I have one less thing to worry about. Or they know how to sell to the business person, the product manager, and they've done that before, working with client, then I have one less thing to worry about.
Okay, okay, awesome. Yeah, I know that's basically very common in many companies. Is basically, yeah, they often do not have the resources to invest a lot in the training, right? So that's why you don't see tons of junior roles. And by the way, just to clarify, even if you're transitioning, you don't always have to like position yourself as junior, right? As you build yourself up more and more and more and more, you don't have to market yourself as someone who is junior, right? So because most companies, it's a little kind of secret. I don't know if it's a secret or not, but most companies, they hire not junior UX folks, right? So you don't want to kind of market yourself with that first, right? Because, and you just want to build yourself up more and more and more so you can join the company and they can see when they're evaluating your application, basically, that you can hit the ground running essentially, right? And help them solve some of their problem without like too much spoon feeding and hand holding. I know it's not optimal, it's not ideal, right? It's but that's how it often works in many places.
Yeah. And one thing to add to that, sometimes depending on the field you're coming from, like for example, I saw somebody coming from architecture. There are a lot of things that might be actually like transferable skills. So you may not need to start from the very bottom, right? Because for example, client management using the softwares is using softwares. It's very easy, you know, to do that because you've done that with like the architecture. You're thinking about the process is very similar probably. In which case, then you already actually have that experience level. And in which case, then if they want to give you more money with better title, take it.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, right? All right, so I see. So I want to take a couple of quick questions here. So Philip asked, it's a little bit of like more specific question, but also related to experience and case studies, right? What can you do if you've done pretty much everything in the UX process except for proper emphasized UX research? Clients don't have budget, company isn't allocating the time for it, etc.
Well, I think this is going back to the question of the value of UX. This is one of the things that we need to be really good at in terms of advocating for it for the users and speaking the language of business, because in this case it's really the immediate user. So I would use that term, immediate user versus end user. So immediate user is really the business stakeholder, in this case the client, and the end user is their customers, right? The user of their app, their website, whatever. So the biggest thing here is that the clients don't have budget. That means that they don't value that. So biggest thing is to first communicate to them the potential risk. If you think about it, they could also just not do any UX process at all and just have developer build it, right? And they could still have something. So that means that they show some value in the UX process. And then at this point, it's just the validation part. So why do we do UX process at all? Is to de-risk, to reduce the risk of building something that's wrong or building something that's not built properly. And what do we do UX research? Is so to make sure, in this case, I assume that you mean usability study at the end, because pretty much everything else is the reason why we do usability testing our prototype or our build before we release to the market is so that we can identify potential usability issues and fix them before we release to the market. So de-risking that, reducing the risk of having a product that's not actually very usable and losing users. So that's the real risk there. Now, what can I do to actually get advocate for them? First is to show the risk, because a lot of time when the client see the potential risk, then they would be more willing to actually allocate resources for it. If not, then at least you cover your behind. And then also have like a backup plan to say, okay, then in the future, if we're seeing this and this, meaning that there's a usability issue, we can do X. Now, another way is to also do, instead of proper UX research, which I assume meaning that using like the method of like moderated usability study with recording, all which can be expensive. You can do guerrilla testing, right? So something that's more informal, testing it with like friends and families. And at least you as a designer would know what those potential usability issues are, the big ones, before you release it.
Thank you, Danny. Yeah, and also Philip, just to kind of clarify, right? So it's also important to remember like which phase you're in, right? So I'm not sure if you're already like working and basically you just need to build more research experience, or you're still transitioning, right? And you're just looking for projects that would give you more research opportunities, right? Because sometimes the mistake that people make is just, instead of just volunteering, find some projects, doing some pro bono work, right? And basically having all the say in shaping that project, right? And really doing something like really putting together an awesome case study. The mistake that people make is they just do any contract work, any freelance work, right? That they get paid maybe a little bit, but in the long run, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? To just take a lot of like of this, various like just sometimes just UI, sometimes it's just other small project, this small project, right? So basically you kind of just have to figure out, are you learning or are you earning, right? And or are you building yourself up, or are you already like positioning yourself, marketing and like really like selling basically, right? And essentially, if in some cases, sometimes it just makes to do some more volunteering and get, great experience with real companies. And then if you're volunteering, you can actually have lots of say in the process, right? And you can define and kind of design that beautiful project and that beautiful case study, which will look amazing and much better than versus you're constrained by this tiny little company with tiny little budget that just says, okay, we just need the wireframing phase and that's it, right? So basically think longer term. But I'm not sure if that's your situation at all, but that just kind of your question reminded me about that.
One thing to add to that, while we're on the topic, I normally recommend people calling it not volunteering, but giving free trial. Because there is a different mentality there. Volunteering, meaning that you're doing it for free out of, of course, the good of your own heart. But sometimes when you're giving something for free, people don't appreciate it, right? And then they also think, oh, you're still a junior. Then they don't respect you as much. If you're giving them a free trial, two things. One, you can already internally, mentally, you can claim that your identity is the professional, right? So free trial as in I'm going to redesign 3 pages the checkout process because I love your project. Right? I love what you're doing. I love your nonprofit, whatever. So I'm doing this because I love it. You can use it or you don't. I just love this. Normally I charge and then you put your hourly rate, then and I can do this. And if you like what I do, we can talk about working more if I'm not too busy. Right. So you're positioning it as the professional already, and that's good for your psychology also.
Awesome. Yeah, great tips, Danny. Great tips. So definitely read some marketing and selling books as well. One good one is called Influence, Psychology of Persuasion.
Robert Cialdini.
Yeah, Cialdini. That one is good.
Yep,
And,
that's very
that's
good.
the weakness for most designers, for most product folks, right? Because we usually like to build and to design and not to sell and market stuff, right? But it's a very important skill that you have to learn and pick up as well.
Yeah.
Danny, what do you think are some of the biggest things that prevents newer or more junior candidates from getting hired or make them look less attractive to employers, in addition to what you already mentioned before?
I think the biggest thing really is just trying to do it the same way everyone else doing it and not honoring their own uniqueness. So we're all different here, and this is one criticisms for people who came out of bootcamp. They're like, oh, the portfolio look the same. It's like they have no personality, cookie cutter kind of thing. There's something to be said about following best practices, but you, again, I keep going back to that term extraordinary. You need to show what's extra about you, what makes you unique. And this is something that as somebody who's transitioning, you need to look to your background and see what makes you amazing, what makes you extraordinary. X what, right? Multiplied by what? So the different background and experiences that you had actually are the multipliers for your UX ability. So this is something that I think is very important to think about and to actually implement.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Danny. That is good. What are some of your, kind of moving on to talking a little more about the actual job search assets, right? What are some of your top resume and LinkedIn tips?
Well, a resume, make sure that you include only relevant things for UX, and you can always appropriate things. Okay, what do I mean by that? I get this question a lot. So like I said earlier in the introduction, when I began my career, there was no UX. I was doing web design. But then I was applying a lot of the same skills as UX. So can I claim that as a UX experience? Of course I can, right? And then I could appropriate the wording so that I could use the UX terms. So I encourage you guys to think about this, appropriate this thing. And a lot of times I get the question of, am I lying? So it's lying if you're actually misrepresenting what you can do because you're the product, right? If you said that you could do X, but then like I hire you and you cannot do it, then that's lying. But if you actually, like you said that you said you could do X, but back in the day when you did it, X was called Y, then now you're calling it X, then that's fine.
Awesome. Yeah, there's some great insights, right? And it's very cool how the field is basically evolving, right? Over all these years, it's like called one thing, then another thing, then another thing. So
Yep.
it's important to be flexible, adaptable, and basically evolve with it,
Yep.
so you're not left behind. All right, so Yasim is also asking, so coming back to the projects part, right? What if you don't have real experience? How can we find these real projects, right? So let's briefly touch on that. I know you mentioned Catch a Fire already. Any additional tips you want to give, Danny, and then I can chime in as well.
Well, you can so it depends on how much work you want to do and also your skill level and the structure that you need to actually do it. So the lowest one, the probably the hardest one is for you to just look randomly, right? Like cold calling, like for example, go to what is it called? I think it's called Wealth Front or something, like Angel List, basically used to be called Angel List, contacting startups and saying that, hey, I can do this for you, or I'm doing this for you. So that's basically cold calling, or like even calling, contacting your local businesses. You see a local coffee shop, restaurant, store, and you're like, hey, I'm gonna do a website for you. That's the hardest part, because then that is good. So this is good for people who are already already finished the education, and they also have good discipline. So they do really want to create this thing, and they're very dedicated. Now, not many people are like that in my experience. So if you need more structure, or you need like help to find matching, then maybe Catch a Fire is one of them, right? So they can match, but it's just also, again, it's a marketplace where you can find these potential clients. But then when you're developing it, you're working on it, you're on your own again. Now, something like, for example, like what Michael is doing, BeginX, is something that's great for somebody who needs more structure and want to make sure you can get it done at a certain time and you're dedicated. So it has to do with like how fast you want to go. If you want to go fast, something with a structure is the best way to go, right? Because then you're paying money, so you have more dedicated, you know that you're invested, and you have the social pressure, if you will, accountability, and you have the mentor to also guide you. So it depends on what you need. But if you already have a mentor, then maybe you don't need this.
Yeah, those are great points. And Sam, you can also, essentially the key point is to find a company, right? And offer them your services. Make sure you can showcase all this stuff in your portfolio and confirm that in advance. Make sure you have access to stakeholders. Ideally, you want to have a mentor. These are just like some of the tips that come to mind that what we do in the program. And I basically just giving you all these tips that you could do on your own. That's you could implement yourself as well, right? You ideally want to have a product company, right? It's not just static websites, not just some business that needs a site, even though that's still much better than doing hypothetical stuff. Ideally, you want some kind of like product company, tech product, etc., so that it's more dynamic, more interactive, more flows, more interaction, which creates a much better case study, positions you better to look for such jobs in the future. And yeah, ensure there is ideally basically those stakeholders, or the client, right? They have implementation intent, so they really want to get this done, right? It's not just something like, okay, just do whatever, right? I don't care about UX, but yeah, you can work on my site, right? So that is still better than doing hypothetical, but it's not as great as it could be, right? So ideally, you want to have the founders or executive team who have skin in the game, want to get this done. And you just need to basically persuade them, because sometimes it's actually hard, even if you volunteer, because they give you a lot of their time potentially, right? And you do want to get some of their time to get that client and stakeholder collaboration experience, which is crucial for that whole experience, right? And the feedback.
Yeah.
So you can,
in fact,
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead. I
No,
was just gonna add that. In
I
fact,
know
what
you
you're
had some thought related to it. Yes, it's
yeah.
yeah. I'll
In
continue.
fact, the thing that you really want to get out of the client work is really the pushback, right? Remember, I said that you want to collect the story. You want to actually get this pushback in a way, like, so you know it's real world, and that's the value of real world projects, right? It lives within the constraint of resources, available opportunities. So you can't have it all, and that would actually give you that experience that you need. So you can bring it to the interview, again, with the end in mind. When you go to the interview, you can talk about that. It's time when I didn't get a chance to do research, this is what I did.
Yeah, exactly. And it's and you can also talk, and coming back to, well, first of all, I think Mika also posted a link to one of our blog posts, and we also have a couple of events actually specifically about building experience, how to do it, how to get strong case studies. One is we did with someone from Google, we did with a panel, we did another panel, so lots of insights in there. So you can definitely check that out. Lots of tips, but yeah, I've also mentioned, like, in terms of channels, you can also just look for startup incubators and accelerators. Just very beautiful, awesome channel, and then just offer and volunteer and basically offer your services. It could be a little more challenging, right, if you're just on your own, because ideally you want this project to be in a team. You don't want to do it all solo. Team projects are very important because it's very important to showcase that team collaboration and your portfolio and your resume, etc. So you want to have a team, you want to have a mentor ideally, because the problem is if you are just starting out, if the company is maybe, you know, the founder of the startup, they're not UX experts either. So you kind of put the two together, and it's kind of a recipe for potentially very long and, you know, basically taking forever to do it, right? And moving in the wrong directions, etc. So ideally, you want to have some type of mentor as well who would help and guide you, etc., and teammates, etc. So you could definitely do something like that and basically just look for projects on Catchafire. I think there's, what else there is? I think there's Democracy Lab. I believe there's Tech Fleet as well. Again, I'm not recommending anything, right? I just heard about those resources where you could potentially find such companies and, you know, basically get together. Or of course, right, another plug, if you want to get it done much faster, if you just want to plug into a system that is designed for you, right, and just get it done and get to your goal much faster, you could also apply to BeginX as well, right? It's not easy. It's like a hack, but it's like a system that you plug into. But it's, yeah, it basically just gets all that stuff done and ready for you, so you don't have to figure all those variables out and, you know, ensure that you have actually like good and strong case studies. Because here's another tip, actually, is that I was just speaking with someone yesterday, and she had quite a bit of experience, right, working at different, and she's starting out, but like different internships and volunteering and etc. The problem was none of that stuff really gave her any strong UX case studies, right? She did a little bit here, a little bit there, like she just did. So really make sure when you look for experience, when you look for case studies, that what you will look at the outcome, look at the output that you will get from it, right? You want to bring value to the clients, the company, but you also want to ensure there's value for you, right? So you don't just do whatever, right? You do something that gets you a great case study and then gets you valuable and useful experience, right? All right, so I see more questions coming into the Q&A tab, which is awesome. So let me just so let me ask you this, Danny, first, and then I'll want to come back and take a few questions from Q&A. In terms of search methodologies, right? I know lots of people have this question, and what are your thoughts on that, right? So which ones are your favorites and why? Like, for example, applying on company sites or job boards or recruiters or networking, informational interviews, friends, social networks, etc. Which ones are your favorite picks and why?
For a job search, I think the best, it's hard to pick just one, right? Because you can't just do one. But at networking is probably the best one. But networking, you have to also build the skill to do that, not just going to, let's say, you know, like a networking event, and then just start asking people, do you have a job? Do you have a job? Do you have a job? I'm looking. That's not really networking. So with networking, you're building connection first. And most importantly, probably the best way to do that is by giving value first. Getting to know people, giving value before asking for value, right? So that's that. And then you still have to do the applying everywhere, right? But then the big thing is that when you're back to the networking, make sure that people know that you're looking without being needy, but we just make people know, yeah, if you know, sure, but then don't make that your primary goal. Make the primary goal just connecting and providing value. Related to the case study, looking for work earlier is actually an amazing thing to offer. When you go to, let's say, a meetup for founders, it's like, hey, you need help with UX? You're not needy, you're actually offering, right? And that's a great way to do that. Another way is to actually make noise, meaning that, right, you know, LinkedIn article, Medium, Quora, all these things make noise. So instead of trying to get noticed, try to make it hard for people to not notice you by making noise here and there.
Awesome. Yeah, great tips. And as always, I want to recommend this book that I'm not affiliated with, but I always recommend. Maybe I should be affiliated with. So it's called 2 Hour Job Search. So basically, it helps you learn how to use informational interviews / networking to look for work, right? And what I like about it, it's short, to the point, only like 170 pages, and it's not just a lot of fluff, but it's an actual system and process and how you can do and what you can do specifically, exactly. All right, so yeah, I think Mika already put it in the chat. I'm actually thinking maybe even we'll invite the author at some point on the show as well to like maybe give some tips as well. But essentially, that will help you not be in that position where you're like networking, like Danny, you were saying, like, do you have a job? Do you have a job? Like you want to avoid that type of network, right? Because that just sounds needy, basically, and usually will not lead anywhere, right? How, for example, I like to go about it is more look at it as relationship building, right? So you go to some event or you do some virtual coffee chats or something, and you just build relationship, right? And you figure out how you can help them and how they can help you, right? Potentially, right? And if it clicks, then you have a relationship, right? That can lead to something. You know, it's kind of similar to dating, right? You don't just like meet someone on the street and ask them to marry you, right? Hopefully, you know, so it's a similar approach, right? So you gotta build the relationship first, right? And then you ask them potentially about any opportunities. And this book, it basically talks quite a bit about that. Yeah, I wanted to say something. I forgot. I see some people, some laughing faces here. So another question Drew is asking is kind of like overall bigger question. And Danny, maybe you have some tips here. Any advice for someone transitioning later in their career, say late 40s, right? Any tips or insights?
For this, I would recommend to really move fast as you can. Make quick decision, move fast. Like for example, like if you need, this is one of those things, like if you need the education, instead of like trying to do it yourself with the Google certificate or something like that, that's self-taught, take the boot camp. Get there faster because your time is more expensive, right? And get structured, get like basically get the help that you can, pay for the help, as opposed to like trying to figure out yourself because you don't have the time. So that's my biggest tip for that. And then also probably leverage your network, your existing network, because if you're in your late 40s, most likely you have an existing network already that you can potentially leverage. Just make it known to your people that you're doing this. If you have a business, or let's say your friend has a business, make a, you know, like make a website for them if you're doing that, or make an app for them if you're using for case study. But yeah, so leverage what you can leverage. So resources, network, and get there as fast as you can. Make quick decision. Don't just like, I don't know. Just make decision, and then you can always revert back.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Drew, I would also recommend just in that well, first of all, 40s is not that old, right? It's still I mean, great age. What I actually noticed is that in some cases, what I notice is that when someone who is a little older and they transition, they actually grow faster afterwards, right? Because they already have all this previous experience, especially if it's like some related field, maybe. I noticed that in a few cases that if they really show themselves, they kind of already like seem more senior and they grow faster. So that's an advantage. Also, definitely show that flexibility and adaptability, right? Show that you're ready to learn and change and grow and improve, right? I feel that some companies, they might have that stigma, right? If someone is older, they're like less difficult to train or whatever. So demonstrate to them that it's not the case, right? Demonstrate to them that it's just a number, right? And you can do what it takes and basically achieve this goal and be trainable and coachable, etc. So just basically demonstrate that. So all right, so Drew, hope that clarifies your questions. I think we have quite a few more here. So we will be wrapping up soon because I know we're running a little bit short on time. Danny, here's what I also wanted to ask you. In terms of what are your biggest mistakes, or maybe not yours specifically, but in general, biggest mistakes and lessons during the search and interviewing process that you've learned yourself or maybe saw in others' examples?
I think the biggest mistake is not showing up for as your ideal self. For example, like I mentioned earlier with somebody who said, well, they have imposter syndrome is going to be a big thing, particularly when you're transitioning. But I'm not this yet. I'm not that. Just own it first. If you don't instill confidence, you're not confident in yourself, client won't be confident in you, right? So that's the biggest mistake, is to, on the identity level, the self-talk. This is why, like, at the meetup, whenever, like, the happy hour that we do every Thursday, when people come, I like to just get people to introduce themselves. And sometimes I introduce them again. So when they're like, oh yeah, I'm transitioning, but they're already done with the education, I just introduce them to a new person saying, hey, so this is the UX designer already. So they're like, oh, I'm a UX designer. So that's something that you need to be aware of. The imposter syndrome is not going to go away, may even continue. Even in my career now, I've been doing this for a while. Sometimes I still get imposter syndrome, which is a good thing, because that means that you're growing. So the identity is the biggest thing, like not owning it.
Yeah, it makes sense. All right, and I know, so this question, this is coming back for a second to portfolios, right? And I know, Danny, you're more focused on the design side of things, but I know you've been running teams as well. So maybe you still have some tips on this. So Joseph was asking, what is the best way to structure a portfolio for positions in UX research specifically? I know this is like a huge topic. We could just do like 3 events just on that as well. Maybe good topic idea.
So
Yeah.
the best answer is to do research on it. So okay, so the short answer is make sure that you have the different research methodologies demonstrated, show your a more robust of understanding biases and all these things. But with everyone, you got to do research, right? Because you don't know. You don't know how user actually do it. Then do usability testing on your portfolio side. But don't just, okay, here's the thing. This is something that is really important, actually. I get asked this a lot, right? People come like, hey, look at my portfolio, give me feedback. That's useless, because then the feedback will be like, oh, looks great, right? So that's what do you do?
Thanks. Great.
So just like the reason I said that you need to do research and apply research methodology on your on testing your portfolio, right? For example, I told you earlier that most likely the hiring manager would spend 30 seconds on each portfolio, right? So one method that I devised, I did some workshop on this, is that here's what you can do. Find, let's say, 5 to 10 job profiles that represent the job that you want, right? So let's say UX researcher. And then list out the keywords of the skills that they're looking for, the qualifications, right? Let's say there's 10 of them. That becomes kind of like your checklist or your persona of company or job. And then when you're testing it with the participants, make them play the role of hiring manager, and give them that list of skills and ask them to evaluate the portfolio looking for things that demonstrate those skills within, let's say, 1 minute, and actually time it. Now, if you had it but they didn't see it, that means that they couldn't find it, right? That's how you do research. So that's how you know.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Danny. All right. So let's see what else I have here in terms of questions. So Priyanka is asking, is Google certification in UX a good start? What are your thoughts on this?
As a start, anything is good. Google is as good as any. It's giving you the structure at least. But again, it goes back to the question earlier, how fast do you want to go? Google is probably faster than not having any structure, but it's definitely slower than, let's say, an online bootcamp. And then an online bootcamp is slower than, let's say, going to like an in-person bootcamp, like General Assembly with instructor and whatnot. So it depends on how fast you want to go. The start, yeah, sure.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Priyanka, yeah, I've spoken to lots of candidates, lots of folks who worked on Google certification on Coursera, right? So it really depends on the person also, right? So some people are much better at just learning on their own, right? Because there's not a lot of support, there's structure, but there is not a lot of like mentorship or support, et cetera, right? And basically it's easier to get stuck potentially. So for some people that doesn't work. Some others, they're better at just like doing it on their own, right? Which is a smaller percentage, like basically smaller part of people, right? It's a great start. It's a great way to learn the basics, especially for just learning the fundamentals, right? Not necessarily, it's typically by itself, it's usually based on our experience, not enough to make the transition, but it's a great starting point. It's a great way to learn the basics and to basically understand the UX process, maybe do a hypothetical project or two, right? Because the challenge is you will work on hypothetical projects. You will do projects solo typically, right? Which is not optimal, which are like the key roadblocks when you will be job searching, right? So you'll have hypothetical solo projects, not a lot of career stuff, right? So it's basically not typically not enough by itself unless you already have like some like connection somewhere, right? That there's like ready to hire you and just telling you, okay, just learn this and you're good to go, right? So it's a great starting point to learn the basics, especially because just that theory, the basics, the conceptual initial hard skills, it's the easiest phase to do on your own, right? You remember that, if you remember that diagram that I showed earlier, that phase is easiest to do on your own, right? The practice and grow phase, where you apply and practice and do more projects and work and collaborate with teams and mentors and clients, etc., that is much harder to do on your own because you have all these different variables, right? So it's yeah, it depends on the person. As I said, we've seen lots of people. We actually had lots of folks who did Google UX certificate as a starting point, at least like the first 5 courses, and then applied to join our program, right? Because that kind of gives you best of both. You have save a few $1,000 on Google certificates, and then you apply, and then we push you through all those hard hands-on phases and give you career prep and push you all the way to a job, essentially with a guarantee, right? It's just like a different way, but a much more efficient way to make this transition potentially, if you're ready to put in a lot of effort. All right. What else we have here? All right, Danny, so here's what I also wanted to ask you. So, and then I'll come back to one question, then we'll be wrapping up. In your opinion, right? Because I know like as the field evolves, right? And as we went through this, like the field is growing, but there has been this spike during the pandemic and then a slump afterwards, right? Because a lot of companies overhired and then they basically laid a lot of people off, right? So it's I know the overall trajectory is still growing, right? And kind of coming back to a more sustainable growth rate. What else do you think, kind of taking that in mind, taking AI in mind, taking like everything that is changing and evolving, what else has changed in terms of this career transition compared to a few years back?
I think what I'm noticing is that in general in tech, the degrees matter less and less, like college degrees or master's degrees. So do whatever is fastest and cheapest for you. That's my thinking. And at the end of the day, it's really the portfolio, and that's becoming more and more true. Another thing is that I feel like UX is becoming more recognized as a department in a way in the company. So it's becoming less and less necessary for us to actually advocate for UX. And in terms of saying that UX is needed, we still need to advocate for UX in a different way, like for like user research, for this, for that, after we're inside. But more and more companies realize that UX is very important. So that contributes to that trajectory of this field continuing to, I think, grow. We're not going anywhere.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Danny. I also want to add that if you want to do more research on that in terms of like what's different now or what is evolving, I like Jacob Nielsen's posts on that. He's written a lot about like UX plus AI, which is very interesting. And we also actually had Jared Spool on the show here, and we actually have the recording somewhere on our site in the resources section. He did like a great talk in the beginning about like what UX hiring managers look for in junior candidates. And he also clarified like what's the state of the job market right now and what happened, et cetera. And that's how, that's very useful talk if you want to like get more insights on that as well. So essentially what he was talking about is kind of what I mentioned in the beginning, right? So that's what I learned from him and from some others. Is essentially there's the overall upward growth trajectory. And then during the pandemic, 'cause I know a lot of people usually have this question, like, oh, what is happening? So the job market right now, it's still worse than it was like in 2020 or before, right? It's still a little bit more flooded, but this year is already much better than last year, right? So it's kind of getting back to more normal growth and sustainable growth rate. Because what happens, just to give everyone more background, right, is that during the pandemic, right, there was this huge digitization push, right, and lots of tech companies primarily overhired, basically, right? They hired left and right, so they hired too many people, essentially. And then when things came back to a more normal state, then they just laid lots of those people off, right? And that basically flooded the market and became it just much more difficult, especially for folks entering the field. Right now, that's getting much better, right? So for example, I know it's like anecdotal experience, but last year, my LinkedIn looked like laid off, looking for job, layoff. So it was pretty depressing. This year is already looking much better. Like I already see many more posts like, oh, I got a job. Oh, we are hiring. Or so I know it's anecdotal. It's not like, proving the entire big picture, but it's just like one of those data points along with some others that is saying that we're kind of getting back to a more sustainable growth rate to what it essentially was before the pandemic. All right. So what else do we have here? So okay, so let's take this last quick questions, a couple of like rapid fire questions, and then we'll be wrapping up. So I know we're pretty much out of time by now. This is not exactly about transitioning, but Danny, I still want to take this question from Tiana. Since you briefly touched on that, right? Any tips for figuring out pricing for contract work? So
Okay. So the easiest way is there is this kind of like rough calculation. So what I would do, especially if you're in New York area where like the employers have to post the range of compensation, the salary, right? Then find these jobs, see the range of salary, so that you know what you want to make for a full-time job. And then let's say if I'm gonna use 70K for this example, then typically the freelance rate would be that, remove the zeros, the 3 zeros, so remove the 1,000, so 70 divided by 2. So that will be 35 an hour if it's 70K for the full time. You may want to add a little bit more, but because you don't get benefits and stuff. But typically that's the math, the rough math. That's how I would figure that out.
Yeah. And usually, there should be some buffer built in for contract work, right? Because it's, as you said, Danny, there are no benefits. There's a little less stability, right? So typically the rate is supposed to be a bit higher than, and for some people, it's actually works much better, right? Because sometimes the rate is much higher than full-time roles. And yes, there is less stability. Yes, there are no benefits, but maybe you can just buy your own benefits. And if your contract is long enough and you see a lot of demand and you really master search and you're really great candidate, that can work well as well, right? So just to add to that. All right, so last question from Keith, and then we'll be wrapping up. And this is just the overall trend of what you see in UX. This is, but it's an interesting question. So I would like to get your perspective, Danny. Just what do you see overall as a trend in terms of more office versus remote versus hybrid roles and UX fields, and what have you noticed recently? Where do you think things are heading?
Yeah, for whatever reason, more companies are requiring more coming to the office, return to the office. And typically that's not just for UX, but it's a company-wide kind of policy typically. That said, I'm still seeing some remote work also. So I don't know where this is going, to be honest. But it's like the remote, I think remote completely is becoming less and less unless you're experienced. And I think more and more like hybrid, but with more days at the office. That's the trend that I'm seeing.
Yeah, it's definitely, to add to that, is basically there was this huge shift, right, towards fully remote work, right, because there was no other option, like in the beginning of the pandemic, basically. All right. And currently, as Danny said, yeah, there is a little bit like more, some companies, they basically want hybrid, right? So there is a kind of a reverse trend. But what I noticed, it's not a like equal shift. It's not an equal shift. Like I don't think it will honestly ever be the same again. I think there is a permanent shift. Let's say we switched 100 points to remote work, and now we're switching like 50 points back to like remote slash an office, right? So it's not, I don't see it personally as ever changing to what it was before, because a lot of companies realize they can have a lot of savings. A lot of people really love the remote work concept and love to have at least a few days a week where they can have more, basically more freedom in terms of like where they're located. So there's still plenty of fully remote roles. There's lots of hybrid roles. So it's, I feel like that's one of the positive aspects of the pandemic, that this basically happened. And more companies, even the more like the ones that were like really stuck in their views, they're like, oh, this could actually work. And this gives people just more flexibility. And, let's say, especially if you have like kids or something, or, so it's really, I feel like that's one
Yeah,
of
I'm
the,
gonna add a couple of things there. Assume typically a question like this is asked because you want more remote work, right? Because it's typically not somebody who's like, oh, I want to go to the office. That said though, and I do enjoy the flexibility, don't get me wrong here, but if you, since the context of this conversation is transitioning, the first couple years, if the more time you can be in the office with other players, with other people, you can learn more, you can learn faster. So it's actually, there's a benefit in there with the real human interaction, you actually learn more. So there's that. That said, the trend is that, and then also the other big thing is that some companies are actually using this like return to the office as a way to get people to quit, because they want to save costs. Like what Michael's saying, that they overhire, and then a lot of companies, like including like Facebook, Google, they lay off quite a bit of people, and they squeeze people. Like instead of firing people, laying off people, they use this return to the office policy as a way to get people to quit. So that's just something to take into consideration also. Now, the job itself, it doesn't, most cases, it doesn't require you to be in the office.
yeah. And also, as Danny said, this trend and shift, and basically this is not just for UX, but like, let's say, a lot of knowledge work.
Yeah, and then
at least a lot of tech work.
And it's a supply and demand, right? If this becomes more and more demanded, if your role is very rare, you can do whatever, really. Even if you're remote, they're gonna want you, but you need to make yourself valuable first so that you can actually negotiate.
Exactly. Yeah, don't go in there transitioning and demanding a lot of things right away. Otherwise, they'll probably pick somewhere else, somebody else. The first of all is just like get your foot in the door, start building experience, And, and then after that, you'll have many more options. It will become much easier as well. All right. So any last minutes burning questions? I think we addressed pretty much all the questions, which is awesome. Love when that happens and we're able to do it. Anything from anyone that you really hope to get an answer to and that you haven't. So if maybe someone is thinking, oh, I really wanted to get answer to this question, or I really want to know about this specific. I mean, I'm talking about UX career transition, right? So not other topics. Anything from anyone really quick. So if you have something, just feel free to put it in the chat or Q&A. And if not, then we'll be wrapping up in a second and we'll tell you quickly about the program that we run and make a quick special announcement as well. So I don't see any additional questions. So I know it's been quite some time. So it's yeah, so just wanted to, Danny, thank you so much. This was really awesome. And I hope you guys enjoyed the event and got some great insights. I know I got. People often ask about our program. So as promised earlier, let me also quickly tell you about this program that we're running, since it may be a great opportunity for some of you to not just build a very strong real client portfolio and real work experience, but also to get the crucial soft skills like team collaboration, client management, presentation, along with career prep and mastering UX job search strategies and interviewing, so you can actually land a UX role. So who the program is best for? The program is the best fit for ambitious people who know UX basics or come from a UX design, not from a UX, but come from a design, research, or creative or tech related background, and look to transition into UX in one of the most effective ways and efficient ways, and without quitting their current jobs or other commitments that they might have. We also pretty selective and look for motivated and committed team players. So what exactly is BeginX? It's essentially a part-time UX career accelerator program with real mission-driven client projects designed to help people transition into UX. We have ran many cohorts and helped about 160 people transition into UX. Alumni of the program have been hired by companies like SiriusXM, Coach, Google, ABC News, Meta, JP Morgan, and many, many more. The program was ranked by SwitchUp as a best UX program and also got featured in Fortune magazine as well as ADP list. The advisors and mentors are also UX practitioners from companies like IDEO, Google, American Express, The Economist, and many others. So what you gain after completing the program is build not just the hard skills, but the critical softer skills, real experience with a robust portfolio, expand your professional network, and master UX job search and interviewing. So you can actually land a UX job. And in fact, our grads have done so well that we offer a money-back guarantee. So you either land a UX job or you get your tuition plus an extra $500 on top of that. If it sounds like you may be a good candidate, you can learn more on beginx.com. You'll see a link in the chat, and you should also get this page pop up after you register for, after you join this Zoom meeting. Our cohorts are also quite small and they do fill up quickly, so please act soon. Also, to thank everyone in our community who attended this event, you will be eligible for a $500 tuition credit if accepted. To claim that credit, what you need to do is by this Friday, tomorrow, actually by this Thursday. We're at too many events on Thursdays. So by this Thursday, so by tomorrow, go to the website and you will see the link in the chat as well and request a free, no commitment career transition consultation, or you can also get request program information or just apply. And by the way, our consultations are designed to not just be some quick program pitch, right, but provide you an opportunity for you to learn about the UX career transition best practices and pitfalls to avoid, get guidance and personalized feedback, and ask your specific questions about your own career, UX career switch, and how the program can help, and see if it may be a good fit, if you may be a good fit for the program. So in addition to telling you about the program, I also wanted to briefly mention that we frequently run different types of virtual events, so we'll keep you updated about the upcoming events and share resources via our newsletter, which we send out every few weeks or so, sometimes more frequently, sometimes less frequently. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you again to our wonderful guest for taking his time to join us and provide all the valuable insights. So it was a huge pleasure to have you here. By the way, Danny, if you would like, if someone would like to get in touch with you, what is the best way for someone, for folks to potentially connect with you?
So the best way is to drink with me on Thursdays. So you can find me on Meetup UX support group. That's the meetup. And there's a lot of other people that's like networking. And also on LinkedIn, I drop my LinkedIn URL there, the profile, on the chat. So hopefully, we'll chat soon.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see. I think you automatically goes to hosts and panelists, right? So I'm just gonna post it in the general chat for you. All right. All right, amazing.
Thank you.
Perfect, Danny, great to have you on, and we'll see you guys at the next event.
Thanks for having me.
All right, cheers, bye-bye.